Manager of Community Outreach and Member Engagement here at the Center for Jewish History, and we are so thrilled to welcome UNC Charlotte's lovely choir and all of their faculty here, as well as I'm aware we have some alumni in the audience, so thank you so much for coming. We're very grateful that you are all here at the center, and we really hope that you enjoy the program and will consider attending some of our future programming. If you're interested, you can go to our website and look under upcoming programs to see when we have other programs like this one. And thank you so much again to UNC Charlotte. We're very thrilled to have you here, and we hope you all enjoy the performance.
Good evening, and thank you all so much for coming. We started this evening off with In Salzig Yam because we wanted to conjure up the sounds of Jewish life in Eastern Europe in the early 20th century, when Moshe Gildenman was growing up. Moshe was born and raised in Korets, a small town in northwestern Ukraine. He was a civil engineer by trade and owned a successful cement plant that he had founded. He's the one near the middle with the tie. Moshe was a central figure in the Korets community, providing leadership to the town's Artisans Association, as well as to its most important philanthropic organizations. He was also a cultural leader who directed the local theater troupe and taught music at the Hebrew school. He conducted the choir, the orchestra, and a mandolin ensemble that he had founded. In this photo, he's the balding gentleman in the third row, second suit from the left. Like Moshe, In Salzig Yam is very much a product of Eastern European Jewish life from the early 20th century. The text is from 1901, but would not appear with the melody we just heard until 1919. And that's when Joseph Gladstein published it in a collection of Yiddish worker songs titled Freedom's Songs. Moshe's personal copy of Freedom Songs contains several markings that suggest that on at least one occasion, he led performances from his copy of the Yiddish songbook. Perhaps the most interesting markings come from the text of In Salzig Yam, where the editor, Gladstein, censored 2 lines of text. Moshe added them back in by hand. Moshe treasured his copy of Freedom Songs so much that it would become one of the few personal items he would take with him when he would escape from the ghetto. He would treasure his copy of Freedom Songs for the rest of the Holocaust. At one point, the front cover apparently broke in half, and he stitched it crudely back together. The back cover and the last 2 pages are missing altogether. Moshe was a peaceful man who had never even held a weapon before the Holocaust. He was content to serve as a business, community, and cultural leader, as well as a husband to his wife Golda and the father to their 2 children. The oldest was a boy named Simcha, and the youngest was a girl they called Feigele. Moshe's idyllic life in Korets was interrupted when the Soviets invaded the town in September of 1941, and then again when Nazi Germany invaded Korets in July of 1941. The greatest tragedy came on May 21st, 1942, when the Nazis murdered 2,200 Jews from Korets, including Golda and Feigele, who was 13 years old. We'll pick up at 4 o'clock that afternoon, after the killings had stopped. The Aktion is over, the German commandant announced. Tomorrow morning, the remaining Jews must report to their places of work. Any Jews who manage to hide may return to the ghetto. They are no longer in danger. Moshe stared in disbelief at the man who stood before him in his elegant German uniform. Other than a few drops of blood on his shiny black boots, Moshe could not detect any hint that the commandant had been impacted in any way by what he had overseen that day. There was a look of satisfaction on his plump face, with a hint of the type of fatigue that comes with completing a strenuous yet rewarding task. The commandant spoke quietly and dispassionately, showing no remorse for having ordered the massacre of 2,200 husbands, wives, sons, and daughters. For several moments, Moshe and his fellow survivors did not move. They were too shocked by the enormity of the day's tragedy to even begin to process their losses. Then, noting that it was the eve of Shavuot, one of them suggested that they go to a nearby Beth Midrash, a Jewish study hall, and commence the Jewish grieving rituals of rending their garments and reciting the prayer of mourning, known as the Kaddish. For Moshe, the very idea of the Kaddish was inconceivable. Still overwhelmed by the losses of his beloved wife and daughter, he was not ready to grieve. When they arrived, the survivors discovered that the Beth Midrash had been vandalized by Ukrainian peasants. The reading table for the Torah had been smashed, and the Torah Ark had been yanked open. 2 Torah scrolls had been thrown to the ground. Some of the men picked up a scroll that had been pulled from its decorative cloth mantle, laid it on what was left of the reading table, and started carefully rolling it back up. As they performed this ritual slowly and ceremoniously, the others watched intently. To Moshe's dismay, it seemed as if their only concern at the moment was whether the scroll had been damaged. The Jews started to rend their garments, wailing loudly. When the praying began, Moshe just sat in a corner and watched. His heart ached, but no tears formed in his eyes. This is the eve of Shavuot, he said to himself, the eve of the feast celebrating the offering of the Torah, the eve of the anniversary of God revealing his presence to the world, along with the commandment, thou shalt not kill. Moshe felt anger rising in his heart. He started to hate the whole world, even his Jewish neighbors who were responding to the murders of their loved ones through peaceful ritual and prayer. A voice called out from inside him, not this way. We must respond to the innocent blood that was shed today, not with prayer, but with revenge. When the Kaddish was over, Moshe ran to the dais and banged the pulpit loudly. Listen to me, you unfortunate doomed Jews, he shouted. An hour ago, I looked at the smug face of the German commandant and thought, if this is a human, then I'm ashamed to be a human. Now, as I watch your reactions to the terrible atrocity that the Germans and Ukrainians have committed against us, I think to myself, if this is a nation, then I'm ashamed of this nation. If these are the descendants of the heroic Jewish Maccabees, then I'm ashamed to call myself a Jew. Know that we're all going to die, sooner or later, but I will not go like a sheep to the slaughter. Be quiet, the congregants urged. They were worried that the Nazis would overhear him and punish them all for his insubordination. I'm not afraid of anyone, Moshe continued defiantly. I'm not even afraid of death. But before I die, let me strangle at least one German with my own hands. Let at least one German woman become a widow, and let one German child become an orphan. Only then will I be able to rest in peace. Quoting the biblical hero Samson, who died as a martyr while killing thousands of enemy Philistines, Moshe vowed, let me die with the Philistines. Later that day, Moshe and Simcha resolved to escape from the ghetto, run through the forest, and join the Partisans, Russian fighters who were engaging in guerrilla combat against the Nazis. Moshe urged his Jewish neighbors to join him and wrote a song during this period he called Kommt in Wald, Come to the Forest, in which he reflected on the pain, heartbreak, and anguish of life in the ghetto and asked, wouldn't it be better to die as men in a heroic death in battle? The song ends with a call to arms. Young and old, come to the forest. Break out of the ghetto. 10 may fall, but 10 will survive. Onward, all Jews, to the fight. Tragically, only a few of Moshe's neighbors heeded his call. On September 24th, 1942, the Nazis surrounded the Chorale ghetto and killed the 1,500 Jews who had remained there. Moshe escaped just in time, along with his son Simcha, his nephew Siomka, and 9 other Jews. With Moshe as their leader, they headed northward in search of the partisans. After a few days, they met up with a reconnaissance unit from Dmitry Medvedev's partisan detachment. They asked to join the partisans, but were turned away because they had only one revolver with 5 bullets that Moshe had purchased from a Polish villager, and a butcher's knife that fellow escapee Zvi Pe'er had grabbed during their escape from the ghetto. On October 5th, Moshe and his group were resting in a pine forest, but Moshe could not sleep. Neither could Simcha nor Zvi. They had been searching everywhere for experienced partisans, hoping to be accepted into their ranks, but had so far been unsuccessful. It's not going to be easy to find partisans, Moshe conceded. We need to get our hands on some weapons at any cost and become partisans on our own. But how are we going to get weapons? Zvi asked. Moshe had been in contact with a sympathetic Pole who had provided him with intelligence on the German military police and the Ukrainian auxiliary police in the area, as well as where one could find weapons. I heard that there's a Russian rifle and a double-barreled shotgun in the Woodsman's Lodge, about 12.5 miles away from here, Moshe told Zvi and the others. We have to get them. Moshe started thinking about how to commandeer the Woodsman's weapons. This will be our first guerrilla mission. If we want it to be a success, we'll need to plan everything carefully, he concluded. Moshe decided that the best strategy would be to convince the woodsman to lay down his weapons without engaging in a firefight. He formulated a plan to trick the woodsman into believing that there were over 100 heavily armed guerrillas in their group, rather than a dozen aspiring partisans with limited weaponry. To make the woodsman believe that the few partisans he would see were all armed, Moshe had Zvi fashion fake pistols out of birch bark, which they stitched together and colored black with a chemical pencil. At midnight the next night, Moshe and his group approached the woodsman's lodge. Moshe stood on the front porch and barked orders that he knew could be overheard from inside the house. I need 6 of you to stay with me and 10 of you to go with Siomka to guard the back door. Yes, sir, Siomka shouted. 10 members of the group marched loudly to the back of the house. After making some noise, they quietly tiptoed back to Moshe. I need 20 men to surround the woodsman's house. Mika, you lead them. Be vigilant. If you see anything suspicious, shoot immediately. The group stomped away, again returning silently a few minutes later. Sasha, run to the horsemen and make sure they're not blocking the road. They should stay on the roadside. No one is to enter or leave the village, Moshe commanded. Everyone else, stay with me. Ready your weapons. Moshe banged on the woodsman's door. Open up, he shouted. He banged again. The door opened slowly. A woman stood before them wearing only her nightclothes. "Who are you looking for?" she asked, her entire body trembling with fear. Moshe gave the door a little push, forcing the woodsman's wife to step backward. He entered the house with Simcha and Zvi. Simcha turned on a light, and the men followed the woman into a large kitchen. "What do you want?" she whispered, pleading with her hands. "Where's the woodsman?" Moshe asked. "He isn't here." "Where are his guns?" "He took them to give to the German commandant. Rumors are circulating that there are partisans in our forest who could steal the weapons, and he would be executed if he allowed that to happen." "That's a lie," Moshe snapped. "The Germans don't shoot people like your husband." He ordered her to grab a shovel that was propped in the corner and follow him outside. "Where are you taking me?" she asked fearfully. "You're going to dig your grave, and your husband will be hanged." The woman's knees buckled. She called out her husband's name, fainted, and fell to the floor. The kitchen door flung open. A tall man stood in the doorway, wearing only his underwear. The woodsman approached Moshe and fell to his knees. "I'll give you my weapons. I'll give you anything you want," he pleaded in a broken voice. "But please, spare my wife." Moshe pointed his revolver at the woodsman and shouted, "Show us where your guns are, and your wife won't be harmed." Turning to Zvi, he commanded, "Wake her up and tend to her." Moshe and Simcha followed the woodsman through several rooms to a large office. The woodsman pushed aside a heavy desk and removed a plank from the wooden floor. He pulled out a Russian rifle, a shotgun, and some ammunition. Zvi entered the office with the woodsman's wife, who ran to the woodsman and embraced him. "Whatever you do to my husband, do the same to me," she whispered weakly. "I won't hurt you. We're just going to lock you in this room. Don't leave until dawn. There are 2 guerrillas armed with automatic rifles who are guarding both windows. If either of them sees you getting close to a window, they'll shoot you on the spot," Moshe lied. Moshe and his group were about to lock the couple in the office when the woodsman asked them to leave some proof that the weapons had been taken at gunpoint. If the Germans came asking, the woodsman wanted some evidence that he had surrendered them only under duress. "No problem," Moshe agreed. "I'll give you a receipt." He wrote, "On October 6, 1942, rifle number 60240 with 40 bullets and a double-barreled shotgun with 12 shells were taken from the hands of this German servant. The weapons are now in the hands of those who will avenge the blood that has been shed by innocents." Moshe started his signature, "Head of the partisan detachment," and then hesitated, unsure of how he should sign his name. His nephew Siomka appeared at the window. "Uncle Misha," he called out, using the affectionate diminutive of the name Moshe, "a farmer's cart is approaching the village. Should we stop it?" "Just a moment," Moshe replied. He had reached a decision. He signed the note with the name under which he would terrorize Nazis and Nazi sympathizers for the next 2.5 years. Uncle Misha. Over the next several weeks, Uncle Misha's group of partisans expanded with the addition of other Jewish refugees they met in the forest. They also increased their arsenal. Using the weapons they had stolen from the woodsman, they attacked 2 Nazi administrators and their police escort. They killed them all and made off with 2 more revolvers, 3 more rifles, and 6 hand grenades. Using those weapons, they launched an assault on a police station and made off with 12 rifles and 2 submachine guns. The bolstered group wreaked havoc in Germany's rear echelon, severing communication lines, raiding storage depots, and attacking police squads. They also engaged in psychological warfare. The Germans had decided to not just occupy Ukraine, but also to plunder it. And they had enraged the local villagers by not only confiscating their livestock, food, and supplies, but by also kidnapping their children and sending them to Germany for forced labor. Uncle Misha cultivated an aura of invincibility by convincing the local villagers that his group was much larger than it really was. And he won them over by bringing them food that he had stolen back from the Germans. He also wrote leaflets and pamphlets that he and his partisans distributed to the villagers. One flyer included a new song that Uncle Misha had written in Russian, in which he asserted that Dядя Misha, Uncle Misha in Russian, was their ally in the war to liberate their homeland from Nazi occupation and asking for their help. Drawing inspiration from the titles of anti-German propaganda flyers that the Soviets were dropping onto occupied territories, he titled his song, "Death to the German Robbers." Uncle Misha's many successes impressed the Soviets, who, like the local populace, were convinced that his group was much, much larger than it actually was. By January of 1943, the Soviets had accepted Uncle Misha and his son Simka into their ranks. Uncle Misha was given command of a new platoon comprised primarily of Jewish fighters. After the other partisans started to sarcastically refer to the new unit as the Jewish group, its members embraced that designation as their own, proudly calling themselves Uncle Misha's Jewish group. The partisans conducted guerrilla warfare deep in Germany's rear echelon, significantly hampering German military operations by sabotaging supply lines, communication, and infrastructure. Uncle Misha's Jewish group sometimes fought independently and other times operated alongside other detachments within the partisans. In early February of 1943, Uncle Misha and members of his Jewish group joined two partisan companies and a joint squad of machine gunners in an assault on the town of Rozvashiv. According to the partisans' intelligence, there were German warehouses in Rozvashiv that were filled with food, medicine, fur coats, and blankets. Such supplies would be crucial to surviving the winter in Ukraine. In the weeks leading up to the raid, the partisans would sit around the campfire during long winter nights, considering every detail of the dangerous operation. 2 fighters from Rozvashiv who had only recently joined the partisans drew a detailed map of the town. They pointed out the houses where the German officers were billeted and the school building where the German soldiers were stationed. They showed their fellow partisans the location of the local police station, as well as the church complex where the German military police force was based. They noted the safest entrances into town and the best routes for making a quick escape back to the forest. The partisans knew that a successful attack on a town as heavily fortified as Rozvashiv would depend on the element of surprise. They divided themselves into 6 squads that would launch a coordinated assault, ambushing 6 strategic targets at the exact same time. To catch the enemy off guard, the partisans slated the incursion for the wee hours of the morning. That night turned out to provide ideal conditions for a sneak attack. A heavy snow fell from low clouds that cast everything in a gray veil, limiting visibility. Any sounds the partisans made as they hiked the 12 miles through the snow-covered forest paths were concealed by sharp easterly wind that whistled wildly, at times sounding like wolves howling or children crying. The partisans arrived at the outskirts of town just before midnight and stopped to rest. At exactly 1 o'clock, Uncle Misha gave the signal and the attack began. The team that the partisans had designated as the communications squad went straight to the post office. They smashed all of the communications equipment and severed the telephone and telegraph connections. The Germans and Ukrainians were cut off from each other and from the rest of the world. Another squad was dispatched to the police station. The partisans tossed several grenades into a dimly lit hall where policemen were sitting around covered tables, eating and drinking. Policemen ran out of the building in a panic, only to be met by a hail of gunfire. They retreated back inside and surrendered within a matter of minutes. After disarming the policemen, the partisans tied up their commander and took him with them. A third squad surrounded the church building, where 200 German soldiers were quartered. The partisans successfully blockaded the building, preventing the soldiers from launching a counteroffensive. Yet another partisan squad attacked the German military police. Garrisoned in a brick church building that was surrounded by a massive stone wall, the military policemen repelled every partisan effort to breach the courtyard by firing machine guns from the bell tower and from rooftops. After more than a half hour of heavy fighting, the leader of the partisan squad used 2 mines to blow up part of the stone wall. The partisans swarmed in, shooting everyone in sight. A handful of military policemen survived by hiding in the cellar or running away into the darkness. The rest were killed by the partisans. While the soldiers and policemen were being pinned down, the supply squad raided the military pharmacy and ransacked the warehouses. They made off with a large stockpile of coats, blankets, medical supplies, flour, butter, sugar, meat, carrots, French wine, and tobacco. As soon as he had signaled the other 5 squads to initiate the attack, Uncle Misha and 10 other partisans, including one of the men from Rozvashiv, had entered the town. They had advanced swiftly but stealthily, pressing their bodies against the walls of houses to avoid being seen. The sounds of the gunfire and explosions elsewhere in town were completely drowned out by the howling wind. The partisans stopped for a moment when they reached the private residence of the German commandant. An armed soldier stood guard at the front door. He wore a thick fur coat with an upturned collar, as well as the lumpy, plaited straw overboots that Germany had issued to soldiers on the Eastern Front to stave off frostbite. Uncle Misha thought the guard looked like an overstuffed doll. Suddenly, a partisan appeared from out of nowhere. With a precise blow to the skull with the butt of his rifle, he killed the guard quietly and silently. Uncle Misha peered through the frosty window panes into the house. He could see the German commandant and 8 officers sitting around a table, which was covered with food and drinks. Their uniforms were unbuttoned, their faces were flushed from alcohol, and the air was thick with cigar smoke. Their eyes were riveted on a young woman who was standing in the middle of the room, accompanying herself on a guitar while singing sweetly a Russian love song. The partisans burst through the door and stormed into the room, shooting at all the German officers at once. The barrage was so swift and unexpected that only one of the officers managed to draw his pistol. He fired one shot, wounding one of the partisans. In the next instant, the German collapsed to the floor with a bullet in his head. Within a matter of seconds, all of the officers were dead. Throughout the attack, the woman had stood frozen, her large blue eyes showing more astonishment than fear. One of the partisans grabbed her by the hand and started shaking her. Snapping out of her shock, she remarked calmly in Russian, "It's about time you got here." The collaboration between the Jewish partisans and the Soviet partisans resulted not only in military victories, but also musical successes. Later in the war, Shmerker Kaczerginski, a Jewish partisan who had escaped from the Vilna ghetto, learned the Soviet partisan song "At the Edge of the Forest" and made an abbreviated version in Yiddish. In both versions, a mother mourns the death of her son, who was killed in partisan combat.
Beim Breck von Feldul steht ein alter Bäum, schöpfen seine Blätter, aus mein Herz sie kommt. Schöpfen aus der See, wie es steht an Welt, wenn es von Bäumen, wie bewahrt und fällt. Schöpfen und ein See, wie es steht an Welt, wenn es von Bäumen, wie bewahrt und fällt. Wie bewahrt und fällt, dort leben Bäum von Felder, liegt Gott die Sonne, im Verstehen, sie sein Kreuz voran, liegt Hefnis es nicht, durch sie schlaft das See, wie der Wind auf der Welt, zu Hefnis
In addition to heroic stories of military victory, Partisan Song chronicles the friendships that the partisans forged in their camp. There were also some romantic relationships, including one between a reclusive young Jewish fighter the partisans called Yosela the monk, and Luba, an outgoing Jewish woman who would often dance with and for the partisans during nightly gatherings. One night, the evening festivities were just winding down when Uncle Misha suggested that Luba perform one more dance. "They're fed up with all of my Russian dances, but I'd gladly dance a chassidl," she replied. A chassidl is a slow dance in Hasidic style that is frequently performed at Jewish weddings. In our family, I was famous for my chassidl when I was just 6 years old. When either of my relatives got married, they would pay extra for the fiddler to play for me. I'd dance, and my dear parents would be filled with joy. "If that's what you want, then dance a chassidl," Uncle Misha said. "I, for one, would love to see it." "But who'll play for me? Vasily doesn't know how." Vasily Vasilievich was the Soviet partisan who played the accordion every night. "Sing it to him a few times. He's talented. He'll figure it out in no time." It took Vasily a little while to understand what Luba wanted, but when she started to finally sing, he started picking out the tune. After a few times through the melody, he was able to play it by himself. "It just doesn't speak to my soul," Luba cried out, wringing her hands. "It doesn't feel Jewish." Yosela, who had been standing nearby, silent as always, turned to Uncle Misha. "Bring me your violin," he said. "I'll play a chassidl for Luba." "You can play the violin?" Uncle Misha was astonished. "You never told us that." "I come from a family of musicians. My father was the concertmaster of the local Jewish orchestra. My grandfather was an even better violinist. He played not only at Jewish weddings, but also the weddings of the wealthiest aristocrats. They started teaching me to play the violin when I was 8 years old. I was very talented, and my father was convinced that I would take over his position as the concertmaster." Uncle Misha sent a partisan to his kibosh, the partisan word for tent, to retrieve his violin. Meanwhile, Luba prepared for her dance. She tucked her thick hair under a hat, leaving out only 2 side locks, which she twirled with her fingers. When she stuffed her hands into the sides of her velvet vest, she looked just like a Hasidic boy. Yosela tuned the violin, played a few notes, and then rested the bow on the strings. He stared off into the night, as if conjuring up images from his past that he could turn into music. The partisans surrounded him, curious and impatient for him to start playing. "First, I'll play a tune by my father, which he used to play at weddings while the bride was being seated. Then I'll play the chassidl." Yosela drew the bow across the strings, and soft notes began to flow out of the violin. He fell into a trance, and the violin followed. It sang, it wailed, it dreamed, and it conveyed his every emotion through sweet melodies. In the middle of a dense forest, miles and miles behind enemy lines, a Jewish boy who had been saved from the hands of German murderers only by miracle, brought back to life through music, Jewish traditions and Jewish customs, centuries-old moments of merriment in which joy mixed with tears. The partisans listened intently, transfixed by his playing. They forgot that they were standing on a moonlit meadow surrounded by centuries-old pine trees. In their minds, they were transported to a Jewish wedding in a small Ukrainian town. Instead of the sunburned faces of partisans dressed in a hodgepodge of ragged uniforms, they saw the shining faces of the happy couple's relatives. As Uncle Misha listened to the plaintive wailing of the violin, he imagined the officiant in a big velvet hat, a red scarf in his hand, standing on a bench in the middle of the room, reciting his rhymes. He saw the bride sitting on a chair that her friends were lifting up in the air. He looked through her translucent veil and saw a pale face and dark eyes that were damp with tears. As Uncle Misha watched Luba standing next to Yosela, tears flowing down her face, he imagined her as the bride. Yosela never took his eyes off Luba. It seemed as he were playing just for her, conveying through melodies the powerful emotions that he lacked the courage to express in words. The other partisans who stood there breathlessly listening sensed both the mourning of Yosela's pained soul and his deep love for Luba. He ended with a high, wailing note that gradually faded away, disappearing somewhere between the ancient trees. For a few moments, everything fell silent. Then Josela quickly drew the bow across the strings again and launched into a merry Freilich, a joyful dance tune. Luba snapped out of her reverie, jumped into the circle, and started to dance. In the blink of an eye, she transformed herself from the tearful bride into a young Hasidic man, dancing artfully to the sound of a Jewish Freilich. Her slim body and nimble legs followed each beat, melting together with Josela's playing into the harmony of music and dance. She snapped her fingers and waved her arms. She danced around the circle, holding her side with one hand and a handkerchief with the other. Faster, louder, she encouraged the onlookers as they clapped their hands to the beat and sang along with the familiar tune. Every time she danced near Josela, who had still not taken his eyes off her, Luba would smile and wink at him, as if to signal that she was dancing for him alone. Josela seemed to understand and played ever more vigorously. When Josela drew the bow across the strings for the final chord, Luba stopped across from him, breathing heavily. One of the partisans threw a glass on the ground. Mimicking the Jewish wedding tradition, he stomped on the glass with his steel-toed boots. Mazel tov, he exclaimed. May this be a lucky hour. Bride and groom, you may kiss each other. Luba wrapped her arms around Josela's neck, and they kissed. Uncle Misha would later write 4 books in which he chronicled his life as a partisan. He was especially eager to chronicle the heroism of Jewish women during the Holocaust. The longest of his 4 books is dedicated exclusively to bear witness to the stories of women, including not only Luba, but also Sonia, the Jewish woman whom they had rescued in Rozvashiv, who had become one of the most fearless fighters in Uncle Misha's Jewish group. Our next song chronicles the story of yet another Jewish heroine, Witte Kempner, a partisan from the Vilna ghetto who blew up a train in the forest outside of Vilna.
Oh
On a sunny spring morning, an old peasant cart traveled down a forest path leading to the village of Bielki. The cart was loaded with large linen bran sacks. The emaciated, mangy horse pulling the cart stopped every couple of steps. It was trembling with every heavy breath. A 12-year-old partisan boy they called Mitka sat on top of the stacks, using a long whip to repeatedly beat the horse across its bony body. He prodded the horse along, cursing at it with Pelesian epithets. As soon as he started glimpsing houses through the centuries-old oaks and pines that formed a green wall around the village, Mitka let the horse take a quick break. He climbed down from the cart, took out a large wrench from under a sack, and unscrewed the nut that was securing the right wheel. Looking around to make sure nobody was watching, he tossed the nut into the bushes and drove off. Between the boys' frantic shouting, the cracking of the whip, and the loud screeching of ungreased wheels, the cart made a loud entrance. It rolled noisily into the village and past the squat peasant huts with straw roofs that lined the street. The cart made its way to the middle of the village, where a large wooden house with a glass front porch stood on a high brick foundation. The building housed a strong police force with 40 Ukrainian auxiliary policemen and 6 German military policemen stationed there. When the boy reached the police station, he stopped whipping the horse. The exhausted animal understood this to be permission to halt. It stood there with its head bowed down. "Move," Mitka wailed, "go!" But the horse would not budge without the whip. Hearing the boy's desperate cries, 6 Ukrainian auxiliary policemen came out of the station. They observed with curiosity the dilapidated cart, the mangy horse, and the boy in tattered clothes. The clean-shaven face of a well-fed German military policeman appeared in one of the windows. He broke out in laughter and called over a fellow military policeman to take a look at the dumb Ukrainians' primitive transportation. The boy climbed down from the cart and inspected the right wheel. "I lost the wheel nut," he exclaimed in a heartrending cry. He started hitting himself in the head. "What am I going to do now? My stepfather's going to kill me." The policeman stood there, laughing at the pathetic peasant boy. "All of the nuts were still there just a little way back in the forest," the boy kept crying. "How am I going to go on?" "Please, sir, hold my horse for a few minutes," the boy asked, handing the reins to one of the policemen. "I'll go look for the nut." He started walking back down the road with his head bent down. He kept squatting down and combing through the dirt with his hand, pretending to be searching for the wheel nut. When the forest became dense again, he quickly turned off the road and started running as fast as he could. After sprinting for about 500 yards, he stopped, put 2 fingers in his mouth, and whistled loudly. One long whistle, followed by 2 short whistles, and another long one, the signal that Simcha and Mitka used whenever they got separated. An identical whistle responded nearby, and Simcha and 2 other partisans emerged from the forest. "Did you deliver the present?" Simcha asked. "I delivered it not only to the police station, but also to 6 Ukrainian auxiliary policemen and 2 German military policemen who were guarding it," Mitka bragged. "Oh, how I fooled them." An informant in the village later told Uncle Misha that after Mitka had wandered off, the policeman had stood next to the cart for a long time, cracking jokes about the mangy horse and the foolish driver. When the boy did not return, they decided to bring the horse and cart into the courtyard of the police station. But neither loud shouts nor heavy blows to its mangy rump could convince the horse to do anything but stubbornly flick its balding tail. One of the policemen concluded that it would be easier to get the horse to move if they reduced the amount of weight it was carrying, and started removing the sacks of bran from the cart. He had taken off 2 sacks and had just grabbed a 3rd one when there was a big explosion. The partisans had placed a mine and a detonator at the bottom of the cart and had tied the safety pin to the sack that the policeman had just yanked. The explosion took out the sacks, the cart, and the horse, along with 4 of the Ukrainian auxiliary policemen. The other 2 were severely wounded by shrapnel from the cart. They fell to the ground and started thrashing about in agony. The German military policeman in the window was hit by a piece of wood that gouged out one of his eyes and knocked out all of his teeth. As the peasants came running out of their houses, the air filled with slips of white paper that had filled the sacks under thin layers of bran. The paper floated gently back down, covering the road, the rooftops, and the yards like fresh snow. Some of the peasants picked up the pieces of paper, read them, and cautiously slipped them into their pockets. They were leaflets that the Soviets had airdropped a few nights earlier, reporting on massive German defeats on the Eastern Front. The Red Army's victory in the Battle of Stalingrad a few weeks earlier had signaled a major turning point in the war, both militarily and psychologically, and the Soviets were eager. They capitalized on the success through printed propaganda. The leaflets, which spread across the ground, warned the Ukrainians who were collaborating with the German occupiers to cease their traitorous activities. The Red Army was advancing, and their day of judgment was looming. Thanks in no small part to the success of the partisans, the Red Army liberated Ukraine in October 1943. After being awarded to a partisan of the Patriotic War second-class medal, which he is proudly wearing in this photo, Uncle Misha was offered a job in Moscow as an engineer. He refused, insisting on staying in the war until the last German was defeated. He joined the Red Army as a combat engineer and became one of the first conquering heroes to walk the streets of Berlin. Along the way, he earned the Order of the Red Star and an Order of the Patriotic War second-class medal for his bravery in combat. And when he reached Berlin, he went to the Reichschancellery, to the office where Joseph Goebbels had briefly led the country just for one day after Hitler had committed suicide one day earlier. And on the wall, in large letters, he wrote in Russian, Yiddish, and German, "Hitler and Goebbels, I have outlived you and your ridiculous racial theory." He signed his note with both his legal name and his partisan name, Moshe Gildenman, Uncle Misha. The previous two songs were from the rich repertoire of partisan songs that come to us from the Jewish partisans from the Vilna Ghetto. But we would be remiss if we didn't present the most famous song from that repertoire, and probably one of the most beloved songs from the Holocaust, Zog nit keyn. Written in the Vilna Ghetto in response to the news that the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto had engaged in a heroic uprising against the Germans, the song became an anthem of Jewish resistance. Its first and final verses urge, "Never say that you have reached the last road. Though leaden skies blot out the blue of day, the hour that we have been longing for will indeed come, when our footsteps will drum out, we are here."
Sog nit keyn, als du gehst den letzten Weg, komm im Leine, verstehen neue Tag. Willkommen wird auf unser uns gebenkte Show. Es wird doch heute von unser Tod wir seinen da. Willkommen wird auf unser uns gebenkte Show. Es wird doch heute von unser Tod wir seinen da. Von grünen Palmen noch bis weißen Meistersteinen. Wir kommen mit unserem Wein, mit unserem Weg. Und wo wir fallen, ist das spritzt von unser Blut. Sprossen wird dort unser Wunder, unser Mut. Und wo wir fallen, ist das spritzt von unser Blut. Sprossen wird dort unser Wunder, unser Mut. Wir seien da. Doktor unser Trott, wir seinen da.
Before we present our last song, I would like to thank the Center for Jewish History for being such wonderful partners in bringing this event to fruition, as well as the administration at the UNC Charlotte College of Arts and Architecture for their support of this project. I also want to thank my dear friend, colleague, and office neighbor, Dr. Jason Dungee, for having done such a magnificent job of preparing this choir. Those of you who are familiar with music curricula will understand that Yiddish is not exactly a part of what they learn, so this has been a real treat, and I'm very grateful to Dr. Dungee. But most of all, I want to thank the students themselves for having immersed themselves so thoroughly in this exploration of Jewish culture, language, and music. The inspirational performances they gave tonight are a powerful demonstration that Uncle Misha and other Jewish partisans were just as successful in preserving Jewish culture as they were in defeating the Nazis. As a way of concluding our event tonight, we're going to present one last song, another gem from the repertoire of the Vilna Partisans that expresses the immense pride that the Jewish partisans felt as they fought to avenge the murders of their loved ones, liberate their homeland, and keep their people's legacy alive.
Von die Ghettos bis der Welt, in die Welt freie, Anschlussketten auf die Welt, Kratzer bis an Laien, auf die Wolke bis weit weit, husch wir Herzen aus, und mit dem Blick Gewickelheit, bis zu neu gewachsen. Auf die Wolke bis weit weit, husch wir Herzen aus, und mit dem Blick Gewickelheit, bis zu neu gewachsen. Heilig sei in Friedens Wohl, der Millionen, als wir auf Wohl und Wohl. Der Faschismus sieht es fest, will ich nur von Verrat, stößt nicht von der Welt gegen Partisanen. Der Faschismus sieht es fest, will ich nur von Verrat, stößt von der Welt gegen Partisanen. Sortet komme Hauptasyl, wenn der Blut verschleißt ihn, von den heiligen Kameraden werden wir gestreiten. Nehme werden kein Wohl sein, letzte Mohikane, bringt der Nacht die Sonnenschein der jede Partisane. Nehme werden kein Wohl sein, letzte Mohikane, bringt der Nacht die Sonnenschein der jede Partisane. Bringt der Nacht die Sonnenschein der jede Partisane.